And welcome to our training session for the month. We are excited to have you as always. Let me flip my screen here. My name is Tim Holliday. I'm the marketing manager. Some familiar faces here today, a few new ones. We're really glad that you're here with us and hope you enjoy. Excellent food, by the way. At any point, I give you my permission, stand up, grab another plate at any point during the presentation. This is good stuff. You don't want to let it go to waste. By the way, it never goes to waste. I have 5 kids, guys. We make sure that food gets eaten. A couple quick things before we get started. In case of emergency, your exits are directly behind you through that door, or also you'll see this exit here to my right, your left. Restrooms are also straight back to the right. We are handing out certificates at the end of this. If you don't, the certificates will be laid out up front. If you don't see your name, let one of us know and we'll make sure that we get one printed for you if you'd like that. We are recording this session. We record every session. This one happens to also be streaming live right now on YouTube. Have a few people watching remotely that couldn't make it. Just disclaimer, we're just recording from the back forward. So we might catch the back of your head, but we're not recording this way, just for your information. If you're super concerned about it, the back 2 rows are in our blind spot. Our next training session will be August 1st. You can put that on your calendar now. August 1st, you'll get an email about it. It's about fluid analysis, optimizing your drain intervals. That'll be a good one to attend. Also, we do have questions intermittently kind of dispersed 3 different times during the presentation. So if you have a question, hold it for 1 second, jot it down on this paper if you'd like. You can keep these, by the way, and we'll make sure that we address those. Any cell phones, appreciate you silencing those so that we can go uninterrupted today. Thank you. All right, let's get started here. Let me introduce our presenter for the day and every time we have these sessions, Russ Seidemann. Russ is, yeah, exactly. Let's give a round of applause. I'll take it. I got to give a few credentials just so you know that this guy is worth listening to. He certainly is. He's our lubrication engineer, as you know. He has a degree in chemical engineering. Also started with Unical 76 in 1982. Graduated from the technical products program. Russ is STLE certified. He is also as a lubricant specialist as well as an oil monitoring analyst. He knows his stuff, and the bottom line is, and I say this every time, we found great value in bringing Russ on board. Other marketers like us will have to rely on the suppliers for that engineering expertise. Takes time, takes effort. Don't get that attention. We have our guy on staff, and so he can really help us out. And I'm sure many of you have taken advantage of that. Now, I have one more thing I'm going to hand over to Russ for the first time here today. This is new to him. Many of you that have been here know that Russ we often call him Dr. Seidemann. And today he's going to prove that with some experiments and such. We thought it appropriate that Dr. Seidemann has a proper doctor's jacket. So new we still have the tags on. So we're going to present this here, and please give a round of applause to Russ Seidemann. Make sure it fits, and we'll take the tag.
I have my suspicions this is actually a straight jacket. That there's.
Get that out there for you.
There we go. How about that?
Oh boy, look at official.
Well, it's clean for a day. All right. Well, welcome to our session this month on our clean fluid solution related to lubricants. If you were with us last month, you know we did clean fluids fuels. This time we're doing something a little different and doing a little more than just swapping in the word lubes for fuels with all the same slides that you saw before. Now there's going to be a little overlap, but let me go through the agenda here and what we're going to talk about, and you'll see what I'm talking about there. In our first section, the first category we're going to try to cover is why clean lubricants are important. Why are we paying attention to it? What's the deal with it? Why aren't lubricants clean enough as they are? Then we're going to spend some time with the basics of cleanliness and the basics of filtration. And this is the area where there is some overlap with last time, because of anybody who didn't attend last session doesn't want and need to come up to speed on this to understand cleanliness. So there's going to be some redundancy here, but this time we've actually, to keep everyone's attention, we worked in a different lab exhibit. Keep your attention in the middle of that. And in our third area, we're going to talk about the clean oil itself. Okay, this is the stuff. This is what to do in your shop or in your plant. Taking a look at cleaning up the oil you do have, and once you have cleaned it up, what do you do to keep it clean? And we're also going to briefly address clean bulk tanks, because there's no point in cleaning up your oil and in buying super clean oil only to put it into a dirty tank, right? So we'll touch on that kind of stuff. So that's our agenda for the day, and we'll have a little question session after each one of those sections. So we'll kick off here with the need for cleaner lubricants and what drives the need for clean oils. And if you kind of distill it all down and summarize it all, it really comes down to component life, okay? All the different pieces of equipment, how long they live before they have to be repaired or replaced, the mean time between failures of things. And your costs involved in that include, but are not limited to, just the cost of equipment, right? It's just not the cost of the hydraulic pump. You know, it's not the cost of a cylinder, it's not the cost of a gearbox, but there's also the cost in fixing and replacing it itself, the labor involved in that. And then there's also the cost of overall downtime that it may cost your facility or your fleet. Okay, so these costs are all important, and they all add up, and they all trace their way back to the cost of the performance and the longevity of the individual components themselves. So within a system, at least that's lubricant related, now we're not addressing all systems, we're sticking to the stuff that we deal with, lubricant related stuff. What are the more vulnerable components? What are the kind of things we're talking about when we talk about component life? Well, most of these things are things that are oil lubricated, and particularly where the lubricant film is very small, because the smaller the lubricant film between two surfaces, the more impact a piece of dirt is going to have, right? That stands to reason. So bearings is the first really good example. Now, whether they be a journal bearing, you know, a plain type bearing, those are the ones with lots of clearance, and those clearances are in the thousandth of an inch. Okay? When you get to ball bearings and gears, the clearances are even tinier. You know, you can imagine that thin oil film squeezed between a couple of gear teeth sliding along. There's not much space in there. So again, dirt contaminants in there contribute to the wear of your teeth. Hydraulic pumps. Okay, vein pumps operate at high speeds and high pressures with the tips of the veins running against the ring. That's a very, very, very small clearance in there. You can wear out pumps very easily that way. Hydraulic cylinders. Think of the openings in hydraulic cylinders and how many hydraulic cylinders leak because contaminants get into the hydraulic fluid. Hydraulic control valves are probably some of the most critical in terms of cleanliness, because the openings, you know, if you look at particularly a complex hydraulic control valve, lots of things like spools going in very, very carefully machined openings. Again, this is 10,000th of an inch type tolerances or less. Just a little bit of dirt can cause spools to stick. And once spools start sticking in a control system, your control is compromised. Another thing that happens a good example that happens in these hydraulic control systems with contaminated oil is that contaminated oil, even with very, very tiny particles in it, rushing through a hydraulic control valve at high speed is kind of like a blasting media. I mean, yeah, it's in slow motion, but if it's going under high pressures and high speed, you end up rounding the corners of some of the machined parts inside a control valve. And when your control valve channels start to get rounded corners, you lose some of the precise control you might be relying on from that control valve. Okay, and you know this there are full day hydraulics courses just on control valves and doing this kind of stuff. So I'm not going to try to take you there, but hydraulic control valves very critical to cleanliness. Seals, a good way to damage a seal is to have dirty oil going through it. You get a nice soft seal working there, get some abrasive in there to wear it down really quick, and now your seal's no longer effective. And even hydraulic hoses. Some of this goes back to the media blasting example I was mentioning before. Okay, a lot of contaminant going through can weaken hoses from the inside. So that's the need for cleaner lubricants from a component and component failure perspective, because these are the things that'll go on to cascade and cause some other problem that'll cost you your downtime. How do we know, but how do we quantify what clean oil can do for us? How do we know that clean oil will make our components live longer or last longer? All right, I mean, besides the intuitive stuff, is there some evidence that this really happens this way? And I don't know if you're familiar with Noria Corporation. Noria is in the industrial world. They're a reliability consultancy, a very large company. They publish, I think, 3 or 4 industrial magazines, plant lubrication, lubrication maintenance, about a couple others. I know Rich knows who these folks are. They also sponsor and put on a couple of large industrial reliability and lubrication related trade shows every year. They send out weekly newsletters. They, as well as offer their consulting services. Been around a fairly long time, very well known, certainly in the industrial world. And the guy who founded Noria years ago had this great interest in cleanliness and reliability and started collecting data. And if I remember reading this right, some of that information started in the 50s, that he started collecting data on oil cleanliness and equipment longevity. And they've taken the data and created what are called life extension tables. How much longer can you get your equipment to live by having cleaner, progressively cleaner oil? And they've generated these. I mean, different equipment's going to respond in different ways. So the data that they've collected, that they had enough data to create these tables for, include data on hydraulic systems. They have data for journal bearings. This information came about largely, I believe, from the power generation industry, where there's lots of journal bearings in these big gas turbines, and so they and the people in power gen plants do a lot of sampling, so they keep a lot of track of what their cleanliness levels are, and of course a lot of data on bearing life. Rolling element bearings, ball bearings and tapered roller bearings, those guys, and gearboxes, information on how, what effect does cleanliness have on gearbox life. So they come up with these life extension tables, and this is a life extension table, and this is how it works. It's pretty straightforward once you understand the gobbledygook, and you do have to understand the gobbledygook behind these ISO cleanliness codes, and we are going to touch on those in the second section. So just kind of follow with me for now. But if the current oil you're getting now, and we'll call this oil straight from the drum, typical oil from the drum, let's say is about, all right, if that pointer's not going to work, maybe I'm using the wrong end. No. This oil is 22-2017, okay? This is not filthy oil, but it's not clean oil exactly either. But if you can take that oil that you're running in your hydraulic system and filter it, clean it up a bit, and get something a little more respectable, such as 18, 16, 13. And hydraulic oils actually can clean up down to this range. Hydraulic oils are really good at getting clean if you want to. But if you can go from 22-2017 to an 18, 16, 13, this is the intersection of those two, the column and the row, right? Comes up with the number 3. And what that number 3 is telling you is that your hydraulic system components could last 3 times longer using that cleaner hydraulic fluid than they would with the dirty hydraulic fluid. Okay? All right? So it's not a number that was grabbed out of a hat. This is a data-based number. I couldn't tell you what the standard deviation is on it, but that difference in cleanliness can make that much of a difference in the life of your hydraulic components. And that's how these life extension tables work. And we have these for not only hydraulics, but I mentioned those other items as well. If you're interested in looking at them and taking one, over on Tim's table, I printed out some for each of these, for each of the component things. So you can pick one up after the class on life extension tables. Okay. So this cleanliness idea, like I said, Noria was a driving company behind it and has been for some time. But the gospel's been spreading. And there are a lot more people getting interested, including the component manufacturers and equipment manufacturers. Okay, by equipment manufacturer, I mean someone who's taking various components and making a big machine, and then they have some recommendations. So the leader in that category is probably Caterpillar. Okay, Caterpillar has been pushing this for some time now for all of their fluids. They have different cleanliness levels. Some of the cleanliness levels are the same, but cleanliness recommendations. And I know of some of their larger mining customers who, because they are using highly cleaned and specially polished oil, that Caterpillar is giving them extended warranties on their equipment. Okay, Caterpillar's putting kind of their money where their mouth is. And if you've ever gone through the Caterpillar's equipment guide, they make it very clear that they want really clean oil. So a lot of other OEMs are doing the same thing as well. I mean, you know most of these names, if you know much of heavy equipment, that these guys have fluid cleanliness recommendations. But I think a lot of people don't really know that. Don't know that that's part of what they recommend. And if we go further upstream, and these are the equipment OEMs, these people are putting equipment together. If you go back to the component OEMs, the people who do components, the bearings, they're actually making gears and things like that, there's a lot of those as well. And they all have cleanliness recommendations. Again, many people not aware of this. So this cleanliness thing is kind of stealth and in the background, but the people who are making this equipment definitely believe in it. And we have an additional handout that you can, or set of handouts that you can pick up that are over on Tim's table, on oil cleanliness summaries from all of some of these component and OEM manufacturers. What they I know you can't read any of this, but what they recommend in terms of cleanliness in various reservoirs or for various oils that are used in their products. Okay, so this is a nice summary of information. This was pulled together by one of our suppliers, by Chevron, who really stays on top of who is recommending what cleanliness level. Okay, are there any questions at this stage about the importance of lubricant cleanliness and where this cleanliness impetus is coming from? All right, and I feel the need to apologize for using the word impetus. Sorry. Okay, we'll go on to the next section then. And the next is the kind of the fundamentals of lubricants, cleanliness, and cleanliness in general and filtration in general. So this does have some of the slides that many of you have seen before. A couple of new things in there. And it starts with the philosophical question that you may remember from last time. How clean is clean? And I tried to get our own Ernie Johnson to pose for this picture, and he was okay with a white t-shirt but said no to the earring. So, Mr. Clean. So the first fundamental we'll start with is particle size. Okay, getting a grip on how small is part of getting a grip on how clean is clean. A micron is very, very tiny. Okay, and you always hear these filtration sizes in terms of microns. Microns are very, very small. And instead of telling you what millionth of an inch it is kind of thing, get the idea that a human hair, the diameter of a human hair is maybe around 70 microns. Okay, that's 70 of them. All right. You take a look at something like the visibility limit. The tiniest you can see is around 40 microns. Okay. Typical motor oil filter, what do I got, 50 to 70 microns, something like that. I mean, if you're filtering stuff down in the 25 micron range, you're definitely filtering things that can't be seen. Right? You can have, what that means is you can have a perfectly clear fluid of some sort and still have lots of 30 micron particles in there, and you'd never know it because you just can't see them. Okay? Some other relative particle sizes, a grain of table salt's about 100 microns across. Talc powder is maybe 10 microns. And bacteria, imagine that's small stuff, right? Pretty invisible. Yeah, that's in the 2 to 3 micron range. So when you hear of things filtered down in this range, that's very, very tiny filtration. Okay? So particle size is one of the important factors when we talk about filtration and look at the right type of filter to use. Particle shape is another important factor. Most particles, most filter design and theory and assumptions always assume that your contaminant is a spherical hard particle when they do various calculations, right? So sometimes they're spherical, but they're more likely to be kind of roughly rounded, but they're not limited to that. So imagine something could be cylindrical, a contaminant that could be cylindrical. Okay? This changes how you would approach your filter it and how your filter would handle it. And then what if you go to a contaminant like that might be spongy or kind of a glob that changes shape? Okay? It all affects on what you're going to use to filter it and how effective your filtration might be. So these are considerations that come in filter design and filter choice. Next up in our fundamentals series here is how do we measure cleanliness? Okay? How do you know what's cleaner than something else? Okay? This is another one of these things that we could have a whole class on just this part of it and how we do it. But the most common method used talking about cleanliness, particularly in the lube oil world, is particle count. Okay? Within particle counting, there are a whole bunch of methods to use to count particles and another bunch of methods to use to report how many you counted. So I'm going to try to reduce the confusion on this. You notice I didn't say I'm going to eliminate the confusion because I'm not so sure that can be done. But there are 3 real common methods sometimes described for using equipment at least to count particles. I mean, you can literally, there actually literally is a method that you don't use a machine. You run some stuff through a little filter patch and you look under a microscope and you look at all the little particles down there. Okay? That's slow, tedious, and insane. So you buy one of these machines. One of the techniques is sometimes called pore blockage. Okay, that's a common technique. A company named Paul makes those. There are other optical counters, and an optical counter concept is pretty basic. It's you have a thin tube of your product going through here, and you're shining a light through it, and you got a screen over here that's kind of counting the little bitty shadows. And each shadow it's counting is a particle. So it does the math from that. And then there's the laser net finds, which is kind of like a highly sophisticated optical counter. It's using a focused laser. In fact, I've got a slide on that. I won't describe it. I'll show you that in just a second. An important takeaway from particle counting, one of your takeaways of the day, your results are seldom identical between these 3 different methods. If you use the same method, but you're using machines made by 2 different manufacturers, you're still going to get results that are seldom identical. It's the nature of particle counting is there is a fair amount of variance that goes on with this stuff. Here's the graphic of how a laser net finds unit works. You're shooting a pulsed laser through this thin tube of product that's going through here, right? And it's going out, and it's going onto a high-def camera screen that picks up what the image is. Now, the nice thing about the LNF unit is it assigns a shape, or it actually views the shape of the particle that it sees. And if that, for instance, if that shape they can program in to determine that the shape is a glob of water and not a particle contaminant. So the LaserNet finds are very good at reducing false positives from the presence of water in oil. That's one of its strengths. It also can give you a report on the various shapes, and so based on the shape of your contaminant, you can get some clues as to where that contaminant might have come from. Is it a wear particle? Is it a dirt particle? Okay, so there's a lot more power behind what goes on in LaserNet finds. Another subtle takeaway that you may not pick up on, unless you remember this from last time, is that this cell that it's going through is a very, very tiny opening. So you're getting not much more than a drop or two of oil going through here, telling you about the particles that are in your 5,000-gallon lube oil tank, or even a 500-gallon lube oil tank. Okay? So the lesson here is you have a very tiny sample speaking for the whole tank. So you better take some cares to make sure it's a representative sample and that your sampling technique and your sample container were very clean to start with. Okay, so now we have a count coming out of here of particles, and it's going to count and tell you there's 14,592 particles were measured at going through the 14 micron filter or something like that. Okay, so how does that get reported in a way that's useful and makes sense? We get to that part of measuring cleanliness, and that is the ISO cleanliness scale. Now there are probably at least three other known cleanliness scales besides the ISO scale that are sometimes reported, but by and large this is the vast majority of what you see is the ISO type particle count. The ISO particle count, being the most common, is reported as 3 values, okay, or sometimes 2 values, depending on the machine and what you're looking for. But this number, like this 18, 16, 13, would be a particle count. That's the same kind of numbers we saw in that life extension table, right? Coming off as an ISO particle count and reported at these 3 values. These 3 values are the number of, related to the number of particles that came through that are larger than 4 microns and 6 microns and 14 microns, okay? So you don't have to memorize that. It's not on the test, but that's how this reporting system is designed. Okay, so what it's telling you a little bit is kind of what the particle size distribution is, what the dirt size profile is inside your sample. Okay, and probably the most important takeaway, if you're not going to spend a couple days trying to understand particle counts, is that smaller numbers are cleaner. Right? 18, 16, 14 is cleaner than a 22, 20, 18. You never see, you always see it in a descending scale. If you see something going along and it's going up, then something's mathematically wrong going along. I mean, it's a typo kind of thing. The way it's designed, you're going to catch more particles with a 4 micron filter than you do with a 6 micron filter, than you do with a 16 micron filter. Only in the case where you're looking at some really, really clean oils, I have seen from time to time where a couple of these numbers might be identical. So I've seen some products that were like 10, 6, 6 before, very, very clean stuff. And that just happens to be, that goes back to the ISO cleanliness scale and how it's run. All right, and here's the real bottom line. If you spend too much time trying to figure this out, you will lose your mind. You guys know, remember I said this last time if you were here for fuels, and I still believe it because I've lost half of mine trying to figure this out. All right? So that's our measuring cleanliness fundamentals. Now I want to talk a little bit about the filtration fundamentals themselves. We talked about last time as well. There are a bunch of different types of filters. The kind that really apply to lubricants, at least in our domain, so we're not talking about air filters, for instance. In our domain, we're talking about cleaning up oils. So we can kind of think of the fundamentals in 3 different categories. And the first type is a screen filter. right? Screen is a very intuitive filter. You guys remember my tennis racket filter if you were here for the last presentation we did. Another good analogy is what you do in your pool if you have a leaf net, okay? A leaf net for taking leaves out of your pool is a screen. It's doing some basic filtering. But what happens if you had a little windstorm come through, right? That net, that'll fill up with leaves pretty quick. You're always having to dump it out. So one of the problems with a basic screen type of filter is it fills up and blinds up pretty quickly. In addition, you got lots of small stuff that still gets through, okay? The next category of typical filter is the depth media. Depth media is more efficient for any number of reasons. Depth media is usually consists of these little twisted and tortuous passages through some sort of media, and sometimes even the passages can change as the media is there. And it traps stuff in of various sizes, and it holds a lot more in it before it gets filled up because of the nature of this twisting stuff. Okay, and to go back to our swimming pool analogy, this would be like the sand filter that you run, or a DE filter in your system. Okay, that's a depth media filter and doing that kind of cleaning. So usually an improvement. Then the third type of filter that we'll see sometimes is adsorbent media. Okay, adsorbent media works by not a physical filtration, but a chemical filtration. So you have a contaminant in your oil coming through, you send it through an absorbent filter, and your contaminant prefers to be in the adsorbent material than it does in the oil. So it leaves the oil and goes into the contaminant material, and your oil comes out clean. And the best example of this in a household setting would be a undersink carbon filter. Okay? It filters bad aromas out of your water for you to drink, right? You get bad smelling water and run it through a filter like this all day, it's not going to do any good. But that's why you would use an absorbent filter. All right? And that's where we go to the demo. Okay, so all you guys who were here before, you have to wake up, because this is a different demo. You notice I don't have the tennis racket up here. Try this live. Let's see how this works. Okay, we're going to take our water and we're going to put in some contaminant. In this case, it's going to be blue food coloring. Blue food coloring is a contaminant that is not a particle. Okay? Blue food dye is not a particle. Blue food dye dissolves into the water. So we now have a contaminant dissolved in the water. How do we clean this up? All right, I'm going to pour a sample here in this jar so that we have a nice before sample for comparison later. Well, we are going to use our high-end, specially constructed filter device here that I've created out of some 2-liter bottles, some Synergy coffee filters, and some activated charcoal used for aquariums. And it's built with these, kind of did with these so I could have a multi-stage filtration. And I'll finish off this top stage for you as I make it. Let's see, get this stuff loaded up good here. All right. That spread out in there. And we'll start pouring in our contaminated solution. And I know you all are saying, what can possibly go wrong? Now, one of the problems or challenges of this, this crude filter device that I've made is it's not terribly efficient. I don't have really good surface-to-surface contact. I could have taken these activated charcoal granules and ground them up further, for instance, to maximize the surface area and some other things. Because if you'll notice in the very bottom of this, you'll see that it's not cleared up, right? So what we are going to do to assist this is just put this stuff through multiple times. And nice and slow. Now I'm going to invite my capable assistant, Joe, to come over here. This is Joe. Joe, come on over. And by referring to Joe as capable assistant, what I mean is I'm going to give him the tedious work. So Joe, you just keep pouring that through there nice and slow and gentle, and do that same back and forth.
All right.
So while Joe is taking care of the pumping portion and the recycle portion, I'm going to go on with a couple more things on our filtration fundamentals and our that I have coming up here. Okay. The next, now we understand. I talked a little bit about the filter types, and we've talked about filter sizing. Something I'm going to give you a little useful or hopefully useful information about buying filters, or at least what to look for when you get filters. So paying attention to the Micron rating. Okay, Micron rating is how filters and their ability to clean stuff up is usually defined. And most filters will advertise, yeah, we filter to such and such a Micron rating. Okay? What does that mean? Because usually they'll use this terminology, either 25 micron nominal filter or 25 micron absolute filter. And there's a huge difference between the two. When somebody says they have a 25 micron or 20 micron or 40 micron nominal filter, what you could interpret that to mean is, well, we ran a test on it once and we think it's about 40 microns, so we're going to call it 40 micron nominal. And that's about all it means, is yeah, you're in the ballpark, but you could go either way by 50% pretty easily, okay? Nominal filtering, a nominal filter rating is worth the paper it's written on. Absolute ratings are done by people who are willing to invest the time to do statistical analysis and do some, buy some official ASTM dust and measure it going through and do these calculations. So a better quality filter is almost always the one that has an absolute micron rating associated with it. Now the next thing you need to know is that absolute doesn't always mean absolute, okay? When you have a 25 micron filter, you will get some particles that are larger than 25 microns coming out the backside. All right? And that is expressed in another terminology in the filter industry called the efficiency, or the beta ratio. Okay? Beta ratio has to do with how much sneaks out. So the example here I would give is if you have 200 particles coming in this way into your filter, but you only get one of them downstream, you have a beta ratio of 200 to 1. So that's a beta 200 filter. Or if that, let's say it was 25 microns, that's 25 micron beta 200 filter. If that filter is built a little better, and now you can get 2,000 particles up here before one sneaks through, well, that's a beta ratio of 2,000. Okay? And beta ratio of 2,000 is a pretty darn good filter. These are some of the best you can get, at least in terms of the lubricants world. These are the kinds of filters we use as part of our cleaning, our IsoClean filtration program. And that's not to say that 200 is bad, but just know that the higher number in terms of beta ratio is better. And then this next slide is something that's completely new. We didn't address this at all, didn't have to, I don't think, in the fuels filtration, because fuels are different than lubes in this way. And that's the question, is can you filter too much? Can you overfilter? Okay? Not an issue with fuels generally. That's because there's so little in fuels to start with, right? It's pretty basic stuff. Oils are a different story. Oils are made up of a base stock, right, the goopy stuff, plus the additives. And the real issue comes to the additives, because it does depend on what the additives are. It is possible to overfilter certain oils. Not all of them. But a select few additives are going to be more vulnerable to getting filtered out. Now, these will include, for instance, anti-foam additives. Anti-foam additives are very large molecules, and they also don't dissolve particularly well into the oil, so they're kind of undissolved in there. The same thing with viscosity index improvers. They're huge, huge molecules. And I forgot to put it up here, but there are also certain cold flow improvers, additives to improve cold, flow of oil at cold temperatures to prevent waxy buildup. Some of those things are in the same character where they could be affected by too much filtration. How do you know? Well, the lube manufacturer may offer some filtration guidelines. And notice that I say may on here. We get a lot of information from Chevron on this, because Chevron has a program that we are part of, a program offered to their distributors called the IsoClean program, and it involves cleaning lubricants to an extremely high degree for customers who are interested in it, such as, I mentioned before, some of these mines that we service that get extended cat warranties because they get ultra-filtered oil, right? So so Chevron put together this very comprehensive program, including equipment and recommendations. They've taken their products, done a bunch of experimentation on filtering their products to find out how tight they can filter them before there's any problems. And so they publish guidelines to people like us who are actually doing the filtration. So we have this big chart of Chevron products and how tight we can filter them. So that information's known definitely from Chevron. Chevron's kind of a leader in this area, so they have probably the most comprehensive slate of filtration information. But some of this is known to other suppliers who get, maybe somebody did ask them about their engine oil one time, so they did some research and found out that, yeah, you can take our engine oil down to 15 microns with no problem. And that is my rule of thumb. Generally, most oils will do fine at 15 microns or larger. Okay, that's a big enough opening, particularly if the fluid is warmed. Okay, and I'm saying warmed, 90, 100 degrees, something like that. Everything's solubilized. Everything is fine going through a 15 micron filter. All right. Okay. So far, any questions about that? Any questions about the fundamentals of filtration or the fundamentals of cleanliness and particle size and particle count? Yep.
Lucas oil stabilizers, after they last as long as the filter.
the Lucas oil stabilizer, and the question is, are they likely to get filtered out? I don't know that for a fact. I do know that chemically speaking, the stuff that's in a typical oil stabilizer, well, I got to be careful going out there because what Lucas would call an oil stabilizer may have some additives in there that I'm not aware of. Because isn't that a pretty thick product to start with? Yeah, and if what they have in there may be related to the what I had described it there as the viscosity index improver, which chemically speaking is this very huge molecule. So that may have, so a filter might actually grab something like that if that's the kind of technology they're using. Okay. Joe, we making any progress over there, bud?
Yeah.
Okay. How many passes have you made through?
I think this is number 7.
Okay. All right. Go ahead and move it. We're going to go ahead and at least give an example. This is not, as you can tell, this is not cleared up yet. Definitely has a blue tinge. But if you can see on the screen here, it has definitely gotten cleaner, right? It's definitely cleared up quite a bit compared to the starting one. And again, these aren't particles. This is dissolved stuff, and it's because the dissolved stuff preferred to be in the activated carbon as opposed to in the water. So hopefully that'll give you some insight as to how the absorption filters work. Any questions about the experiment? Since we're at question time. All right. Well, we'll go on to the third section of the presentation for today. Oh, yes. Yeah, typical engine oil, Micron rating on a car is somewhere around 50 and 70 range, somewhere in that area. So they're not as tight as they could be. What I do not know is what the beta ratio is for a typical engine oil filter. I guess I've never seen one reported, so they could be just about anywhere. Any other questions? Well, I got a chance. So the next area we're going to talk about is the clean oil itself. I've got this going to hit 3 little areas. One is filtering oil. How do you get your oil clean to start with? Once you have clean oil, how do you keep it clean? Right? Doesn't make sense to go through a lot of effort and buy some ultra clean oil or clean it up and then not keep it clean while it's in storage in your place. And then third, of course, it doesn't make sense if you've got clean oil there at your place to put it into a dirty tank. So let's go talk about cleaning up oil real quick. There are a couple of ways to go about doing this. This is what I call the relatively quick method. Is the first way. This is something actually that power plants do. Power plants have outages every 6 months or so, and we'll get a call from various power plants to come out and during an outage, and they have these turbines that generate electricity have like maybe a 5,000 gallon storage tank of turbine oil. So they'll come out and say, hey, can you polish our turbine oil? And we'll go out there with our equipment and we'll take the oil out, we'll clean it up, run it through and put it back. And I mean, we can do this in a day, for instance. If we're going to have somebody go inside and clean the tank, there's the time for that. But when we talk about a relatively quick, a one-time effort, it's a day or part of a day. And we're not limited to 5,000 gallon tanks either. We go out and clean 500 gallon lube tanks, often enough, okay? Or cleaning the oil in those, and those don't take as long. You're not pumping as much stuff through them. So it can be done on a one-shot basis. You can also do the what I call the slow motion version, and that is hook up a what's called a bypass filter, or sometimes referred to as a kidney loop filter. Okay, these things are on skids or carts. You hook it up to an outlet somewhere, you cycle it back in, and you just let it run and run. It's a 24/7 kind of thing. It's only taking off a small portion of the oil each time, and it's running it through a very tiny filter and returning it to there. And you don't have to have the tank offline, right? You don't have to stop your operations. You still, if this is engine oil and you're still changing oil, you still pump oil from it to service the next vehicle. All right, and you take regular tests. You know, where we've done this on some places, you come in once a day, because it's a slow motion thing. You come in once a day, you pull a sample, do a particle count on it, and you watch your particle count march its way down until you hit whatever your target was, whatever your cleanliness level the OEM wanted it to be, for instance. And then call it good. You got it cleaned up. You can do some other stuff as far as your having clean initial oil in your bulk tank through various hardware investments. So you can put a filter on the tank inlet side of things. And that's what this picture of those yellow filters up over there, those are out at one of our customers. We hook up to a cam lock just on the other side of that when we offload our truck. And it goes through those yellow filters on the way into their bulk tank. All right, so they're getting it cleaned there. Now these folks happen to clean it even after it comes out of their tank too. They get really clean oil. Another thing you could do is install a permanent kidney loop. So instead of a skid or a cart, you could have a dedicated pump and filter system that's always running on this stuff and always keeping it clean. And you don't have to worry about ingression problems. That's that picture on the far lower right that you can barely determine what it is. You can put a filtration unit on the dispensing side of things, a last chance filter. This is a pretty good idea. But as the case with all filters, maintaining your filter has to be important, right? I mean, if your filter gets blocked, almost all filters or filter housing designs are designed so that instead of exploding, that they bypass the fluid flow. So if you've got a filter that's all plugged with stuff, your oil coming by there gets bypassed, you're essentially got unfiltered oil, but you're under the impression that it is filtered because there's a canister screwed on there, right? So you need to have either a maintenance practice to change the filters, have set up differential gauges or some sort of an indicator when a filter needs to be changed. Okay, so that's what you do for receiving and holding clean oil in a bulk tank situation. Another thing you can do as far as clean oil is to buy it really, really clean in the first place. Okay, get ultra clean filtered oil. This graphic here, this is our IsoClean skid. You can see we got 4 filter towers in there, and what you don't see in the background is we have a whole bunch of storage canisters for the filters, because we have a set of filters for engine oil, a set of filters for gear oil, a set of filters for hydraulic oil, a set of filters for some other oils to avoid cross-contamination stuff. This filter skid gets hooked up to a 330-gallon tote. And it just cycles, not unlike a kidney loop, except for it's cycling the whole thing, and I think you do it a maximum of 10 times. And you bring this cleanliness levels extremely clean. Okay? It's really it's a kind of a relatively new idea. Chevron's the only oil company that's embraced this, I'd say, wholeheartedly. Other oil companies have interest in it, and you see it done on a spot basis. But Chevron put together this IsoClean program with lots of support and a structure so that distributors like ourselves could get involved in it. So there's not a lot of the suppliers in the market. And one of the things that if somebody's knocking on your door offering to sell clean filtered product, because I'm not saying we're the only people that can do it, but we do offer is certification. So all of our totes go out with an official certification document. And the way we do this, that machine has a particle counter on it. So we know that particle, and that's not a laser net fines particle counter though, that's an optical particle counter. And we know when we're in the ballpark. So then we pull a sample and run it through our laser net fines machine. All right, now that gives us confidence that we're at the target we need to be at. Then we pull a sample and we overnight it to a Chevron approval laboratory. They have a laboratory who runs their LaserNet Finds unit and confirms our result. They send us back the documentation that allows us to print this certificate that says, yes, this meets this particular ISO code of 181613. Okay, so our customers actually get a certified clean oil. All right. In terms of once you have either your own cleaned up oil or you're buying pre-cleaned oil, what do you do next to keep the stuff clean? Well, here's some hardware improvements that you can do as far as keeping stuff clean. Filtered breathers. Okay, I'm a huge fan. Filtered breathers, and not just any kind of filter, a desiccant filter, something that'll suck the moisture out of the air, not just keep the dirt out. We do tank cleaning, and you wouldn't believe the amount of dirt we sometimes get out of the bottom of the tanks. Although if you were here for the fuels tank, you saw the kind of dirt we got out of some of those tanks. You can put filtered breathers like this on a tank. You can even put them on drums. If you got a drum of product, and especially if it's a drum of product that doesn't turn really quick, get a filtered breather on there. Okay. Another hardware item, secure openings. Okay. Many tanks out there have just flip-top lids. Many have lids that are non-existent. Having a lid that it's secure against ingression, very important, whether it's water and dirt. That's a fairly simple hardware upgrade, both for tanks and for drums. And then there's when handling your lubes, some things you can do about keeping them clean. Okay? Appropriate transfer containers. Okay? This is a nice way of saying don't use that old 5-gallon bucket that you have to transfer it from your oil storage over to the truck in bay 6 that's getting it changed, right? Okay. In this case, I like these color-coded kind of things, right? You put your transmission fluid in the red stuff, the engine oil always goes in the yellow stuff, the gear oil is always in the purple one. You reduce cross-contamination between different products, much less it's covered with covered spouts. Everything stays much cleaner. Okay? Get the appropriate transfer containers. Okay? I was somewhere last week or the week before, and I watched them use one of those zinc pour spout containers. Okay? Zinc pour spout containers may be good for your gardening, but zinc is not very compatible with things like hydraulic oil and motor oil. Okay? They do not play well together, much less the thing had no cover on it, then the guy just cleaned it out with a rag. So, appropriate transfer containers, a big upgrade for you. Okay. Quick connect fittings. If somehow you're using a cart, if you have a pump that's used in multiple places, quick connect fittings like these with flat ends on them, so you don't have as much stuff that can build up in them. In fact, they actually make plastic caps that even go over these for cleanliness. Any kind of quick connect fitting, very helpful, again, at keeping stuff really clean. And once again, putting filters on the outlet side of your lubes, okay, like this customer did. These are, I want to say these are a 15 micron. Last chance filter, get the product, be sure it's clean on its way into the crankcase. And then the third thing I wanted to mention in this section has to do with tank cleaning. Okay? You've got clean oil. Don't put it in a dirty tank. That should make a lot of sense to all. And we've got a lot of experience with dirty tanks. Cleaning up a dirty tank is very contaminant dependent. So cleaning a tank is not a one-size-fits-all situation. And if you have a tank thing that you want to talk to us about, we would send somebody out there to take a sample and take a look inside and to see what we're up against first. Okay? This is not necessarily a quote over the phone kind of thing. For instance, if you've just got dust and dirt and debris and typical particle stuff, you can do a diesel high pressure spray washout. You just knock all the stuff down, you flush it all together, you suction it all up, and you can end up in a clean tank. But sometimes you've got stuff that's built up in that tank. Some sort of additive dropout, some sort of varnish is in there, some other contaminant that you never could spray off. So you have to go at it with a chemical approach, okay? And we've done this before too. Figure out what your contaminant is. You go in there with special chemistry to go after it. That takes longer. It's a little more elaborate. You got to do some extra flushing to get stuff cleared out afterwards. Okay? And then there's the case where you may have to actually go in there with a putty knife, okay? Some confined space work to get stuff cleaned out. Okay? That happens too, and we've been involved in those kind of projects. All right. Are there any questions about anything from getting a hold of clean oil or cleaning up your oil or procuring clean oil or cleaning tanks? Anything in those? Because that about does it for me up here. I want to thank you, and hopefully I've given you something to think about. And again, if you have any individual questions you want to ask, spot me around afterwards. I'll be the guy in the geeky white lab coat. Thanks.
Awesome. Round of applause for Russ Seidemann presenting here today. Thank you. Just click to the next one. Thanks again for being here. Again, grab another plate on your way out if you'd like. Next session is August 1st, where we will be talking about drain intervals and some different things there. We'll be sending out a survey. We always do. Thank you for answering that survey, and continue to invite your friends. If we can fill this room, we'll just open up another session. So we certainly appreciate having you here. We don't take for granted that you take time out of your day to join.